Good morning. This is Alex Luna, and we also have here Juan Carlos.
Hello, everyone.
We're very, very happy to have you here and to have this beginning of our legal summit today. And we're going to go through some slides now to set the stage for our first talk of the day. And Juan, if you want to take along.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is truly an international audience, so we welcome you from every corner of the world, and it's great to have you. We'll share, as Alex mentioned, just a few slides just to get kind of the mood of the event. When we started these events 4 years ago, disruption was certainly not a topic for lawyers. We put here the definition of disruption. We probably know that you've heard of it by now, something that is truly transform everything in our lives. We all knew about this fatality some years ago, and that in a way we were aware of it, but we didn't connect the dots. And then what we learned was this reality of the Uberization of everything, and then how it impacted everything we did in society. So we live in a disrupted digital society, and this is also affecting the legal industry as a whole. So this is a fact, there is no question about it, and that's why we're here. A year ago, this was the feeling, and these are data that was taken from a survey conducted by Bloomberg Law. It reflects kind of the reality of the USA, but it pretty much shows the trends all over the world. It comes to show that it's really been moving into the direction of digital transformation and the reaction to everything that is going on. Also important is the expectation about clients, what clients expect from law firms. And this is revealing because everybody now, and again, this picture was taken, or this survey was taken a year ago. And certainly a lot has happened over the past 12 months. So it's a combination of what law firms are doing, because they know that it's a requirement to remain relevant and competitive, but also a picture of a reflection of what clients are expecting internally and from their external providers. This only shows kind of the growth of the artificial intelligence software revenues. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit more of the numbers. It shows this tremendous growth of 35% on an annual basis. So it's really something that is with us, will remain with us, and is transforming the legal industry as a whole. This will certainly just continue growing. And we'll see certainly the acceleration of everything that has to do with that combination of law and artificial intelligence. That's kind of the topic of this summit, and you'll hear a lot about it. If we want to keep it very, very simple, the benefits of this combination of AI and law is cost, time, and efficiency. And that combination would certainly change the legal industry as we know it now. This is important, and we always make reference to this because we're really talking about the legal ecosystem. It's law firms, companies, courts, academia, anybody in the legal ecosystem. When they incorporate AI, they'll see the benefits of this invisible helping hand. And there is a lot of great content throughout these 3 days. You'll hear from truly experts in the area, which will explain a lot of this in more detail. And this is important. The legal industry could emerge from its crisis with a reputation of being something that not too many times is linked to lawyers. And Alex, from here, if you want to take it for a couple of more slides.
Sure. Lawyers and everybody else for that matter, but in the future, the challenges that we see is going to be stressful lives, too much information, and too much technology. And the sector is also embracing legal tech. And then the idea is to see how we help people choose between the hundreds of suppliers that are there. And Well, this is classic. So law is one of the last bastions of anti-innovation and must learn to embrace digital efficiencies. And we hope this legal summit sheds some light onto the critically important relationship between AI and law. And we are here because AI will definitely exploit in the legal sector. It's not a question, it's a when, and the when is now. And just before we start, we definitely need to thank our amazing sponsors. We have iManage, Logistic, NetDocuments, Hogan Lovells, Esija, GeniusSoft, Deloitte Legal, Thomson Reuters, Lexsoft Systems. If it wasn't for their help and support, we wouldn't be able to do this. And we do have a very balanced agenda. Artificial intelligence with use cases in the legal industry, which is very interesting for the people that we have now in the audience. We have people for at least 40 countries the last time we checked. So it is truly international. And we have law firms, we have corporate legal departments, but we also have engineers, programmers, coders, and a whole spectrum of people that would not normally be in these kind of talks. And definitely is that we do have amazing speakers. We have 3 full days of events in 2 sessions in the morning, 2 sessions in the noontime in these 3 days. And for today, we have the honor to present you Dan Linna. He will be talking about evaluating artificial intelligence for legal services. And Dan is a Northwestern Pritzker School of Law and McCormick School of Engineering, a senior lecturer and director of law and technology initiatives, a visiting professor of law, a Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics affiliated faculty. He will be talking about all these points. I'll just give you a minute to read them, and I'll stop sharing my screen so Dan can take on and start.
And thank you, Dan, for accepting the invitation. It's truly an honor to have you again.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Very pleased to be here. Let me share my slides. Those look good. You can see my slides?
Yeah,
yes,
perfect.
good.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to talk about evaluating artificial intelligence and evaluating in kind of the broad sense. I want to just talk about what is artificial intelligence, give some examples of how it's being used, but then talk about how we can go about kind of evaluating AI. How is it going to affect law practice? How can we validate the systems that we create? And Alex and Juan Carlos kind of set the stage talking about how computational technologies are changing everything, right? Everywhere we look, we see the effects of computation. That they mentioned Uber, we could talk about Airbnb, Netflix, and we see examples even just on this screen about AlphaGo, virtual reality, all the ways in which computation are changing things. And of course, the pandemic has accelerated this change. We've been working remotely this whole pandemic. There's more and more of us that will continue to work remotely, at least a significant part of our time. And it's accelerated change in law firms, legal departments, legal tech companies, and courts. I want us to think about one of the reasons why it is so important to think about disruption. And that is because for many people, the legal system does not work for them right now. And we think about the US, one of the richest countries in the world, and about 80% of the impoverished and half of the middle class lack access to legal services. When they have a problem, they can't afford a lawyer, or they might not even know that they have a legal problem. This isn't just a problem with individual consumers. Even businesses say they are not getting what they need from their lawyers. And often this is startups and small businesses, but even large businesses say that the complexity they have to deal with, the international complexity, well, their lawyers just are not equipped to help them deal with those problems today. So this is a global problem, right? The global justice gap is growing every day. Over 5 billion people are deprived of justice. And so this is another problem that we can solve, right? We can really think about in this digital world that's emerging, what does the rule of law look like? And how can we ensure that everyone has access to legal information, legal services? How can we make sure that everyone is empowered in this digital world that we're building? And something I want to mention is that we are mostly focused in this conference on technology for law. How are we going to use AI, people process data technology to improve legal services delivery? But we also need to be thinking about the ways in which technology, the making of law is going to evolve. And sure, maybe this first starts with the law for technology, thinking about, well, what law governs artificial intelligence, the liability rules and things like the Algorithmic Accountability Act. And Europe is passing laws on regulation of artificial intelligence. But we're also going to change the way we make law and the way it is represented. There's a lot of initiatives on thinking about law as code. There are a lot of people writing and thinking about how might we embed algorithms in the law itself. That is going to change the way we deliver legal services. And of course, courts are changing as well, right? So this is not just thinking about, well, how are we going to use technology in our industry? We have to look at the way that our industry is already being tremendously changed by many other forces outside of practice of law, delivery of legal services. Now, another example I wanted to just show briefly is this is a recent solicitation for proposals from the National Science Foundation. This is incredibly exciting to me, where you see the National Science Foundation saying that they need computer scientists and legal researchers working together to think about how are we going to develop software systems that are accountable with law and regulation. I think this raises a lot of really interesting opportunities. One of the things that I'd really like to think about is we develop software systems that have an understanding of law and the implications of making particular systems. How do we make sure that what we learn in developing those software systems is then used to develop software systems that can provide people with legal information and legal advice? Now, this particular program is $7.5 million. There are going to be 10 grants, $750,000 each. My hope is we're going to see more and more funding pouring into this area. And we need lawyers and legal researchers and others to work with these technologists to think about what accountable software systems look like in the future. All right, so here come the robot lawyers, right? This is one of the clickbait items we see, how artificial intelligence is going to change things. It's a much more nuanced than this idea of robot lawyers, of course, right? But there's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence, but a lot of it is for good reason. Artificial intelligence is changing many things in the way we practice today and has the capability to change many, many things in our practice and the ecosystems around us. Just to give you one example, this is a research project that I did with Thomson Reuters last year, where we surveyed leaders of law firms in the United Kingdom and the United States. And it was really interesting to look at their perceptions of how artificial intelligence was being used. This is just one part of the survey. So first of all, we asked them about the value of different contract management tools. And this is 3 tools primarily that you could think about. Automated contract review tools, right? You're going to hear a lot about those in this program. Automated contract drafting, which we're seeing more and more tools like that to automate contract drafting, automate contract negotiation, and contract management and storage. How are we using AI tools in those spaces? And the vast majority of people said that these tools in law firms, law firm leaders, said these tools are at least somewhat valuable to their firm. And the near majority said they're very valuable, extremely valuable. Now, when we asked those law firm leaders about the use of these tools in the future, no one said they're not important. Everyone said they were somewhat to extremely important, with an overwhelming majority in the very to extremely important. Now, the N is only 25 on this, right? But then again, that's a representative number when you're thinking about surveying law firm leaders, right? This is meaningful information. What about the value of litigation drafting automation? There too, right? And we were seeing more and more tools to help draft pleadings, to help draft discovery requests, to help draft briefs in courts. These law firm leaders, very few of them said anything about not being valuable. They're all on the side of at least somewhat valuable, and 28% very valuable or extremely valuable. These tools have been a little bit newer to arrive in the marketplace, so people are still learning about them. But again, when we asked about the future of AI and litigation management, no one said they're not important. Everyone said they're at least somewhat to extremely or very important. Now, when David Curl and I wrote up the report around this, one of these things that we observed is that there did seem to be a lot of people kind of in the middle. And we think that a lot of people are still trying to learn. They're not certain, right? They have this sense that, boy, these tools are going to be important, but they're not really sure. How are we going to deploy them? What sort of impact are they going to make? How are they changing the ecosystem around us? And we need more research. We need a better understanding. We need more science to understand our practices, the way we deliver value and quality to our clients, the way the legal system works, so that we can have a better theory and practice in implementing these AI tools. And one of the reasons why we need that is because there are plenty of people who are pushing back on change in the legal industry, right? We can just look back. We can look at examples like LegalZoom. If you're a client and you mention to an attorney that you're thinking of using LegalZoom, right? There'll be a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to risk your child's future by using one of these tools like that? And of course, this ignores that the ordinary practice that we engage every day. Mistakes are made doing that as well, right? How do we better understand practice? How do we better validate and evaluate these different tools? Another example I wanted to give is interesting. I was doing a presentation for the probate and estate section in Michigan a few years back, and I was doing some research on websites that were helpful on self-help. And I came across this website. This is a law firm in Texas. And I looked actually just a few months ago, and they still had this information up on their website. And at first I thought, oh, this is helpful. This is like a self-help information. What is a will? Some information. Can I prepare my own will? Okay, this is good. Well, wait a second. The law allows you to prepare your own will. However, the law also allows you to perform surgery on yourself. Neither process is recommended. And is this really the way we think of law practice and things like doing wills, that if an individual wants to engage in some sort of self-help, it's like performing surgery on themselves? I think this is a wrong message, and we can empower people. And there's plenty of opportunities for lawyers to do well in this new evolving ecosystem. But I think we can look at some examples of where technology has been adopted in large scale. And artificial intelligence is for technology assisted review. And e-discovery is one example of that. This is from 10 years ago, where the New York Times is talking about lawyers being replaced by cheaper software. And so a lot of the manual review of documents now in e-discovery, in diligence, we're using technology-assisted review tools. Now, I remember when these tools first started coming out. I was a partner in a large law firm, and there was a lot of skepticism. Oh, we can't trust these tools. The judges are never going to accept them. It's going to take decades. It's just not going to happen. Like this is noise. Just ignore it. It's going to go away. No, it didn't go away, and it happened really pretty fast. One of the reasons why is because we had rigorous research. Researchers, in this case, Maura Grossman and Gordon Cormack, and studied technology-assisted review and actually demonstrated that it can be more effective and efficient than manual review. So we need more research like that. But we also need a better understanding of what is artificial intelligence. If you're a lawyer or a legal professional practicing today, you need to have at least a functional understanding of what is artificial intelligence. And I'm going to run through something really quick, actually, to help try to provide that foundation. This is going to be quick, but hopefully each one of you will get something from this. So first of all, when people talk about what is artificial intelligence, you might hear some debates about like, well, that's not real artificial intelligence. So this isn't. For our purposes, I think it's best to just have a broad definition of what is artificial intelligence. It's simply intelligence demonstrated by machines. What I want each of you to take away is artificial intelligence is not one monolithic thing. It consists of many different tools. Here's a nice chart from Neo to Logic talking about rules-driven systems. Those are expert systems, right? That's a type of an artificial intelligence system. There's machine learning and many different types of machine learning: deep learning, supervised learning, unsupervised learning. There's natural language processing. Law, we work in words, right? We have statutes, we write briefs, we have court opinions. How do we work with those words? We use natural language processing, right? And so these are the primary tools that we use for artificial intelligence in law. So one of the things I would tell you is that if anyone says to you, well, we're using artificial intelligence to do this, you need to be able to ask them, well, what do you mean? What type of tools are you using to do that? And if it's a data-driven tool, you need to be able to ask, well, where'd your training data come from? How is it labeled? How do you know that you have high quality labels on that training data? Now, something else I want to talk about is just phases of artificial intelligence. Sometimes you'll see the tweets by Elon Musk or some of the discussion, and you'll be thinking about kind of like Terminator robots, right? That's the idea of artificial intelligence. And where we're at right now is we have narrow AI that's skilled at one specific task. When you think about your iPhone or Android phone, you can talk to it. It could create a calendar appointment. It can translate your speech to text. It can do a lot of really amazing things. But each of those things is a specific task that it can perform. It can't learn a new task. If you could plug in your phone to into your vehicle, for example, it's not going to learn to drive the car. That would be something you would have to be specifically trained to do. Now, these narrow tools can be very, very powerful. Particularly, you think about many of these systems, what they really are is ensembles of many other systems. So you can put together a lot of different things and create a very powerful system. What a lot of people are driving towards, are hoping we get to, is artificial general intelligence, sort of human level intelligence. Machines that can perform wide varieties of tasks and learn rapidly like humans can. Now, people are very bullish about this, like Ray Kurzweil, and I think, gosh, I don't know, I think he's predicting like maybe 15 years from now, we'll have artificial general intelligence. There's others who have a little more sober expectations, like Andrew Ng, who's a giant in this space. And he says, we might not ever have artificial general intelligence, or it might take 1,000 years or 100 Nobel Prize breakthroughs. Okay? But the key takeaway is what we have right now is narrow AI. We really need humans to create these systems with intentionality. These systems are not, for the most part, creating themselves, right? They can learn new things, but in relatively circumscribed scope. And I mentioned earlier, right, a couple of different tools. There's rules-driven artificial intelligence and data-driven artificial intelligence. Now, sometimes in these discussions, you'll hear people say, well, expert systems, we had the AI winter, they don't work. There are a lot of tools that are very helpful in law today that are expert systems, rules-driven systems, document automation, a lot of other tools. And I think it's a mistake to dismiss those tools. We're seeing them have a lot of impact. And in fact, I think we learn a lot building those tools. We create a foundation and we can collect data that can help us create data-driven AI tools. Now, in either space, rules-driven and data-driven AI, you are going to hear about algorithms. And a lot of time when people talk about algorithms, they talk about it in a very opaque way, like it's something you can't understand. But an algorithm is really as simple as thinking about a recipe for doing something, right? It's a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem or accomplishing some end, especially by a computer. Think about a recipe for a chocolate cake. You have certain inputs, you process them in a particular way, you bake the cake, and at the end, you have a cake that you can eat, okay? That's an algorithm. Some of you have had stats classes and you may have learned about linear regression, right? You can plot out X and Y variables, you can calculate a line of best fit, and you have a model that can help you understand the relationship between a couple of variables, which could actually help you make predictions about what might happen in the future if you know just one of those variables. If you understand these concepts, you have a good foundation in understanding artificial intelligence concepts. And I mentioned rules-driven systems, right? The common example is TurboTax, a tool that can help an individual complete a tax return, ask questions, processes that information, and can output a tax return or tax advice. How do we create these expert systems, these rules-driven AI tools? When you think about the human expert, right? Here it's depicted as a doctor, or you can think about it being a lawyer. And that lawyer would work with a knowledge engineer. You think about some task. How do you solve a particular legal problem and then draft a complaint, let's say in court? Well, you can figure out, well, I need these certain inputs. These are the questions I would ask. This is the information I need. This is how I would process that information. And this is how I can create that complaint. I can spit out that complaint that I would want to file in a particular jurisdiction. Now, we often think about expert systems as being focused on the end user. And I think we really should be pushing harder on that, thinking about consumers, thinking about people in the business who can engage in self-help with expert systems. But I think we need to think also more about how we can use expert systems as knowledge management tools so that we can create guided workflows for junior attorneys in firms, paralegals, but also senior attorneys in law firms. So we can have better consistency, higher levels of quality. I think about, like, would you drive anywhere these days without Waze or Google Maps, right? What if we could create smart assistants like that, starting with rules-driven systems for the work that we do in law firms to improve the consistency and the quality and the value produced for our clients? There are huge opportunities there. So how do you create an expert system like this? Well, think about so much of what we do in law, it's walls of words, right? Here's a letter ruling on deferred action on childhood arrivals. How do we process that as lawyers? Well, one of the ways you would commonly do this when you were in law school, and maybe sometimes in practice, although it's a little less common, would be to create a flow chart. Really think about, well, what are all the different inputs that are relevant to making a decision under this statute or in this contract? Okay? And once I know these inputs, what are the inputs I need to know to make certain decisions about what's going to happen? So if you can create flow charts, if you can break things down in this way with rules using logic, you've got a good start on creating an expert system, an AI expert system, a rules-driven tool. And we see a lot of these from legal aid organizations. Here's an example from Michigan Legal Help, creating a toolkit for helping with divorce. Here in Chicago, where I'm coming to you from today, here's an example, this rent-intervention chatbot. If you're a tenant and you have a problem with the landlord, you can use a chatbot like this. I think the best chatbots don't just help people solve problems, but they can intervene early. They can help people understand, what are my rights? What are my obligations? What's likely to be the outcome if I withhold rent, if I contest an eviction, if I pursue a remedy in court? There's a lot of possibilities here. And it's not just legal aid organizations and that are creating tools like this. We're seeing large law firms. The data breach area is an interesting area. I did this kind of work when I was in practice before I joined the academia. Right? The client calls, hey, we may have an incident. We don't know. We're investigating. We've got customers in the US and the UK and in Canada and Australia. What do we do? Right? So you have a team of associates running around trying to update the legal research and figure out what's next. Right now, this was 10 years ago when I was doing this. It was a little bit more of an evolving practice still at that time. A lot's changed since then. And of course, law firms have better and better knowledge management systems so they can respond effectively and efficiently. And several law firms have responded by creating tools that the client can use. So they can figure out, they can understand what they need to do, which customers they need to notify, which states attorneys general and other government authorities should be notified. And then you can consistently update this. You can even outsource the updating of this to different organizations to update the legal research to make sure that's working. Here's another example from Wilson Sonsini. They created tools, their 650 subsidiary did when California Consumer Privacy Act came along to help with compliance. Now, this highlights another very important change here. A few years back, most law firms kind of assumed like, oh, well, we're not going to charge our clients for these tools. This is just going to be like added value. We'll just give these away. I think most firms have realized that, well, sure, you can give some of these things away, but the clients aren't expecting you to give them away. If it adds true value, if it really helps them solve a problem, you can charge for these tools. Absolutely. Right. So changing our thinking on the way we deliver value to the clients and what they need, right? They need certainty and cost. It's not always just cheapest. Understanding that their problem will be solved and it'll be solved at a specific price. That's valuable. And Wilson Sonsini is expected to make millions, they said, from this app that they created. Now, something else I'll mention in the rules-driven AI space is courts. And you may have seen some of the headlines about Estonia using AI judges and China's doing really interesting things. There's been some really interesting things happening in Brazil, a lot of places. But this is from the Civil Resolution Tribunal in British Columbia. And they've created, this is a tribunal, it's a court. It has original jurisdiction over a variety of disputes. For the most part, lawyers are not allowed, although lawyers are allowed for certain types of claims, including certain motor vehicle injury claims. Now, this is an online platform, and it doesn't use machine learning, but it uses rules-driven systems, rules-driven AI systems. And it's not focused on adjudication, like our current courts, but really on reaching an agreement, helping people understand their rights, their obligations, and resolving that dispute. Now, this should catch our attention because, again, the focus is not on having attorneys there, but empowering the individuals. This can be done asynchronously. You don't have to be in court at the same time. I think we really need to be watching the way courts are changing and around the world, not just in our own jurisdiction, because I think we're going to see rapid changes in the way we think about court, what court is all about, and who it empowers in that process. Okay, so that's a quick overview of rules-driven AI. I want to talk about data-driven AI. So how can we use probability, statistics to automate different tasks and make predictions? Now, in machine learning, what we're mostly talking about in the law space is supervised machine learning. And what that means is that we need humans involved putting labels on information. Let me give you a couple examples of exactly what that means, right? So it's more than just having contracts, it's having labels associated with those contracts, for example. So think about spam filters. How do spam filters work so well? It's because we have labeled data and billions of labeled examples. And we're constantly training. These are online systems that we're constantly updating. So you go to your email inbox and an email comes in and that system makes a decision. It makes a prediction. Is this a spam email that should go to the spam box, or is it ham? Is it good stuff, the stuff I want, and it's going to stay in the inbox? And how does it do that? Because it's already seen billions of examples where we've taken emails and moved it to the spam folder or left it in our inbox and said it's the good stuff, the stuff we want. We're putting labels on each of those emails by the way we classify those emails. And when we tell to the system, hey, wait, no, this email you put in the inbox, it actually is spam, right? It's retraining, it's online updating. Now, this is one important juxtaposition between this is how spam filters previously worked. And that was using tools like regular expressions. And so you could think about, okay, well, we're getting spammed with these Viagra emails, right? We need to just say, if there's Viagra in the email, it's spam, and it's going to automatically move it to the spam email box. Okay, so that rule would work well at first. But then the spammers, they start getting smart, and they say, you know what? If instead of Viagra, we put V and then the number 1, the human looking at it, it still reads like Viagra, but the computer doesn't know that that's a Viagra email anymore, and it won't go to spam automatically. Right? So rules can be a little bit brittle. Now, actually, with these regular expressions, some of the technology system review tools and contract review tools, you can do some really powerful things with regular expressions. And I think there will continue to be powerful things we can do, particularly as we get more standards and best practices around the way we do things. But a key difference is that if you create a spam filter that works really well, over time, it'll start learning, right? When you start getting the Viagra with the numeral 1 replacing the I in your inbox, and you say, well, hey, wait, that's spam, right? And then when many people are doing that, the system's gonna have more and more training data to learn, hey, that's spam too, right? Okay, so that's a great example of what the difference between going from rules to data-driven AI, right? These systems that are online and can keep learning from the new examples that you show to them. Now, that's an example of categorical machine learning. We can have what's called continuous machine learning as well, supervised continuous machine learning. All that means is instead of predicting categories like yes, no, or ham, spam, we are plotting continuous numbers. It could be 0 to negative infinity or 0 to infinity. So think about, you've seen maybe predictions of home prices. How could that work? Well, just imagine you had data about the square footage of homes, that's your X variable, and the price of homes. If you plotted that out, if you could draw a line of best fit, simple linear regression, you now have a model. What you think the relationship is between square footage and price of homes. So if someone came to you with another home, they don't know what the price should be, but they know the square footage, you could make a prediction based on this model. Okay? Now, of course, we can build more and more sophisticated models. We can use multiple regression. We can use many other types, many more sophisticated algorithms to make these predictions and consider a lot of different data. Of course, we're surrounded with AI everywhere we go. You go on the Amazon, you go to look at a book, and then you get recommendations for other books. How does it do this? Again, data, right? For each one of us, Amazon creates profiles. Like, we look like other groups of people. And then Amazon looks at data about those other groups of people. And what kind of books do they buy when they see Intro to Statistical Learning? If we show them these books, which ones do they click and also buy? Oh, well, Dan looks like those other groups. Let's show him those same books. And then another key realization here is they have instant feedback, constant feedback about When they show these books, do I click on one or the other? What do I do? Do I not buy any of them now all of a sudden, or did it help reinforce the path I was going down? And we have to think about in law, there are many areas of law where we do not have these feedback mechanisms. We do lots of different things. We just don't know what the result was. We file motions, we make changes in contracts. We don't really know what happened in the world after we took these actions. And that's a huge impediment to data-driven AI. We need to create systems that can capture information about not just the things we do, but the outcomes on the back end. So we have all this billing data and we don't really know what the impact was of all those things that we're doing. Okay, so that if we could have better data like that, we could do many more things with it. Netflix, recommender systems, many things like this work in similar ways with all this data that is available to these systems. So I mentioned technology system review for electronic discovery, right? It had a huge impact. The initial systems were no different really than a spam filter. You think about it, you have to separate documents into relevant, not relevant. That sounds a lot like ham and spam, right? Making that spam filter decision. In diligence now, there are many different tools available for reviewing contracts, finding things in a corpus of contract. We've seen tools for automating different tasks in litigation, drafting a response to a complaint, drafting discovery requests, drafting motions, right? So there's a lot of tools that can automate that. How can you do that? If you have the training data, then you can create a system that can create an initial first draft of an answer to a complaint, a motion, or a brief. And we're seeing companies look at how to automate negotiation. And I get a lot of lawyers who push back on this and say like, oh, but there's a lot of intuition and, you know, I've got to be the lawyer to understand how to negotiate. We got to think about the kind of negotiation that it is, right? And if you're a company that negotiates thousands of commercial contracts, just even think about the training data you would have if you kept the back and forth, like the different versions of the contracts and the information that was going back and forth between the parties. Could you use that data then to predict how, when someone proposes a change to a contract, on how the company would ordinarily react? And I think one of the things that maybe that people push back on is they think, well, you can't automate that whole process. Now, perhaps you could, right? But probably what's going to make a lot more sense is we think about, well, how do we create systems that can really empower the people in these processes? And so when someone proposes a change to a contract, why can't I have a smart system that says to me, hey, when other people have proposed similar changes, here are the fallback clauses you've used, right? And people are developing systems like this today. I want to just mention briefly deep learning, because these are tools that are being used now more and more in the legal space as well, although it's a little less common. But some of these review tools and things like that, particularly more common. And so deep learning is inspired by our notion of the way the brain works. Now, for the most part, this is not the way we think the brain works anymore, but it was inspired by this, right? This idea of you have a neuron, you have several different inputs to the neuron, and you get an output, Y, right? Like a function, right? Thinking about a neuron as a function. Well, what if you take these neurons and put them in several layers? Okay? You have many layers of this. And what if you train the different layers to pick up different things? This is an example of face recognition tools. So probably many of you have seen, like on Facebook and Evertool, other places, it's pretty amazing how good these face recognition tools can work on recognizing you on just a little, without a lot of training data, without a lot of labeled examples. How do those examples get labeled? Well, you label yourself or your friends label you, and suddenly now a new picture goes in and it makes a prediction, it spots you. So think about this. If you have this neural network, this deep learning neural network, and maybe the initial parts of the network are examining contrast, patterns of contrast, face features, the face, and then the output layer. And then there's this process of back propagation, right? Where the system is told, is it right, is it wrong on the back end? And it can keep going through adjusting those weights to maximize, to optimize correct predictions. So this is a key understanding again, right? If we don't have information about what's right or what's wrong what these systems are doing, we're going to be very limited in how we can create systems that really excel at the level of accuracy and quality that we expect, right? So we need to understand what quality looks like. We need to understand a good answer from a not so good answer. It doesn't necessarily have to even be wrong. But right, we need to be able to make those gradations. And just as an example of how these systems work, right, many of them, and they can be designed in different ways, but many of them will basically make a prediction. Turn this cat picture on its side, and this particular network would predict 10% likelihood it's a dog, but 90% likelihood it's a cat. And that's important to understand because, one, if you understand the way that system works, you might say like, oh, no, I don't want to say it's a cat unless I'm 99% sure. Or as long as it's 50-50, right? Yeah, just say it's a cat. That's fine too, right? But these are decisions that people who are building these systems make about how the systems are going to work. And not all problems are equally difficult, right? And some of the problems may sound trivial, like telling the difference between a dog and a muffin, right? But we would be surprised when we start looking at pictures of blueberry muffins and chihuahuas and would say like, okay, maybe this task will be more difficult than we thought. But in each of these different areas where we've seen artificial intelligence excel, a key has been evaluating how well these systems work. In e-discovery, that has been the case, for example. If you've done any e-discovery work, you'd be familiar with statistics like precision and recall and the harmonic mean. Okay? Simply calculating true positives, false negatives, true negatives. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, probably most of us are more familiar with the ideas of true positives and false positives, true negatives, false negatives than we'd like. Right? We can say when a prediction was made, whether it got it right, that it's consistent with ground truth or not consistent with ground truth. When we're looking at tools like e-discovery systems, we can think about a corpus of documents and we can ask, well, what was the return set? In this case, this is represented, these are hot documents in red, not hot documents in blue, and the return set is the bold black line around it. We can compare humans to the system and see how well they do, right? We can make these comparisons, we can know, and we can compare precision versus recall. We can create a confusion matrix, we can calculate the true positives, true negatives, false positives, false negatives, and we can calculate a variety of statistics about how well a system performs. Now, one of the reasons why it's important to get this confusion matrix, right? If as lawyers who are working in e-discovery, you should be asking the other side, your vendors, for this information, is to understand that often what people will give us is the accuracy. Like how well does it perform for each particular document? But we've got more sophisticated measures of effectiveness. And this one in the middle, for example, I've highlighted, if someone said, oh, it's 68% accurate, that might sound okay. But when we look at that example in the middle, we see there are a bunch of hot documents that have not been included. And this is represented a bit better by the F measure, which is a little bit lower, 56, right? It's a low recall, 39%. I know this might be a lot to take in all at one time, but the point is we've got to understand these evaluation metrics and what that means in a given circumstance. And it's not just e-discovery. I talked about the work being done in e-discovery and it's been validated. These systems are validated, although there's surprisingly still some argument about some of these things. I think the science is not being well practiced by many who are making arguments about these questions, right? But this is an area where we need more rigor and more discipline as well. But this same sort of evaluation needs to be happening in other areas. LawGeeks did a study looking at contract review. Now, this was a little bit more of a marketing endeavor, but I give them credit for doing this work to compare. And I think they had a reasonable design and to ask these questions about it. But I think even in this LawGeeks study, you notice they're talking about accuracy level. And it makes me wonder, like, well, why are they talking about accuracy? What about precision? What about recall? What about the F measure, right? Let's dig into these questions a little bit more. We got to understand how well these systems work and where might they fail. But we also need to know and understand that they're probably better than humans in many ways. So and understanding these failure points and where they work well is what will allow us to create systems where humans are empowered in the workflow, right? The technology helps them do a better job, be more efficient, be more effective, and produce higher quality and value for the clients. One other study I would mention is that Quizlex did a nice study of a variety of AI abstraction tools. And so they use these full sets of metrics. Now, they didn't name the different tools they're using, but this is another good example of some research being done in this space and helping nudge us forward. I do think, though, there are some worries that we ought to have in this space. And Mark Lortzen and Quentin Stainhouse wrote a nice article about substantive software quality. It's difficult to assess these, and they say that we're in danger of serious harm being done to unwitting users. Now, I don't want fear, uncertainty, and doubt to derail us in this space, but when we see sandboxes in Utah and Arizona, and we have more companies coming in, we need ways to evaluate these tools. And we need to understand that lawyers make mistakes as well, right? We know mistakes happen in practice. We can improve the quality of work done by humans, work done by machine, and work that's done in unison, right? We need more rigorous methods to ensure that we're designing, implementing, and validating these systems in a way that produces higher quality and better results. So one of the underlying problems I would highlight is that if I show a lawyer 2 different contracts, we have no agreed upon way to assess the quality and value of contracts. Okay? Just like, hey, when I'm in practice, I want to write a settlement agreement. I want to write a commercial purchase agreement based on my anecdotes and intuitions of what I think is right. That's the way I write it. If someone down the hall gets it, they're going to do it a little bit different, right? It's not very rigorous. That's not reproducible. It's not a scientific approach to it. We could be much more data-driven. We could produce much better quality and value by thinking about these things. And I've been doing research on this. And sometimes people will push back on this idea about science of law practice. You think about it, though, medicine and law were at about the same point a little over 100 years ago. Very normative. We'd have communities of practice. We'd do things just based on what seemed the right thing to do. But medicine, they took an empirical turn. They started engaging in evidence-based practice, started measuring outcomes and saying, well, when we do something, what does that produce? Do we get the kind of outcome we want to have? We haven't embraced that in law. We need to, right? This goes back to this people, process, data, technology. Yeah, AI is great, but if it's just your hammer, you go around thinking you're going to solve problems with AI. No, I don't think so. We need a quality movement. We need to understand our processes. We need to understand project management. We need to understand people. These technologies can be very powerful and are going to have huge impacts in our systems and in our organizations. But we have to be more evidence-based. We need a quality movement. We need to bring more rigor to the things that we're doing. We need to understand how to be able to evaluate technologies that we're using for legal services and in legal systems. I wrote an article about this with Helena Hapio that's in the World CC journal, but just talked about we don't have high quality training data for these systems. That's why it's so important to ask someone who's creating an AI system, where did that data come from? What are you training on? What are you using? If it works on oil and gas, or do we think it's going to work on a deal for software in the technology space, right? Let's understand what training data was used. And often these tools are being based on the way we practice now, which when you ask the clients, when you ask people at World CC, are the customers happy with the kind of contracts that we're producing for them right now? Do they consider the right things? And we often find that there's a lot of misalignment. And so what do, right? We need metrics. We need to understand how to measure, right? What gets measured is what gets done. We need metrics for quality and value. We need public data sets for training and benchmarking. You think about the ImageNet data set. That's what really drove a lot of progress in object recognition. We need similar sorts of data sets for AI for law. We need independent research, testing, and auditing. We need people turning over and being more transparent about the data they use, about how well systems perform, and allowing independent research, testing, and auditing. We should be thinking about principles for developing trustworthy legal technology. So all these AI principles that are developing, we're way behind on thinking about the application of those AI tools in legal services delivery, way behind. There's not any discussion, as far as I know, really about some of these questions. There's a bit more discussion about that in courts and in administrative agencies, but not nearly enough in comparison to the way these tools are being used. So on the AI principles, the law of AI side, we've got to catch up as well. So we think about quality versus value. I think software testing can give us some ideas about how to think about quality and value. So you think about software testing. When you do verification, are you building the product right? Is it technically correct? But then validation, is it the right product? Is it what the client needs? And we can think about the same thing in terms of contracts. Is it technically correct? Okay, New York jurisdiction or London arbitration clause, is it technically correct? Does it get you that thing? Versus what's the value? Is it fit for purpose? Is that what the business needs? Is that good for the relationship? Is it good for society? And Paul Lippy is one person who's been writing about this a lot. I wrote a book, that book chapter I mentioned just a few minutes ago. I wrote about this kind of like, how might we create a model for measuring the value and quality that comes from a contract. So one other quick example I wanted to just point out is one of the other reasons why we need to be evaluating these systems is thinking about bias that can creep into these systems. And bias can manifest itself in many different ways, one form of which is racial and discriminatory bias. Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru did a really interesting study at MIT, great study, looking at face recognition tools, using these basic concepts like I was just talking about, like true positive, false positive, thinking about precision recall, right? And just, I'm going to cut to the punchline since we're short on time in this particular presentation. But what they found is that these tools that Microsoft and IBM had released out to the world in Face++, right? There was a huge gap in the way these tools performed for light-skinned men versus dark-skinned women, right? Now, this is a problem. This is a huge problem with technology. And companies like Microsoft and IBM were getting it wrong. And there's still mistakes being made. Now, there's been a lot of effort on addressing particular instances like this and improving this, a lot more attention. And I think in the legal industry, we need to be aware of this as well. We absolutely have to be. I mean, we've got our own example in the legal industry, like Compass and recidivism algorithms. Now, I'd argue we shouldn't be throwing those out. There's still a lot of potential to improve the legal profession, improve criminal justice system using tools like that. But we need to be aware of how they work and where the potential problems are. Okay. And it's not just racially discriminatory bias. There's other forms of bias that can creep in that make for bad predictions, getting it wrong. That is not going to produce quality and value for your clients. Right? So we need to understand these. We need to be more rigorous in the way that we're designing, implementing, and validating these systems. And so I think actually I should probably wrap things up there. I'm just going to mention one last thing really quickly, and that is that we need to understand the stages of machine learning as well. We can't just evaluate at the end. We need to understand all the work that goes into creating one of these systems and all the ways in which bias can creep in. And again, bias isn't just racially discriminatory bias. It's getting it wrong. It can be noise introduced to the system. It's going to make for bad predictions. So thinking about, if you really understand, how's one of these systems created? Well, there are people at the beginning who have to decide, how are we going to operationalize certain contracts? What is good for a contract, for example? Or are we predicting recidivism? Or are we thinking about ways to intervene to improve an outcome for someone who's been accused of a crime? Okay, so it's really important that we as lawyers have a functional understanding, we as lawyers and other legal professionals, a functional understanding of how these tools are developed. And we're there from the beginning. Right? And we need more and more engineers and technologists to learn about the law and to think about the way that these, to truly work at the intersection of these disciplines, computer science and law. And so it's more than just monitoring the outcome. It's also thinking about the pipeline for creating one of these systems and making sure we show up at the beginning of it, because you can't just solve things at the end. You can't say, let's make sure it's fair and it's accountable and there's transparency at the end. It's got to start from the beginning with these projects, understanding the data, how it's cleaned, how the problems were framed, how the concepts were operationalized. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop my sharing there and just leave a couple of minutes so we can have a couple of questions if Juan and Alex have any questions.
Thank you very much, Dan. Great presentation as always. Let me ask you probably one that is comprehensive enough. We have people that are joining us from many, many countries and different levels of maturity and stuff like that. But what would you say, what is the low-hanging fruit? What are the practical ways to start embracing AI in law? What do you think are those typical first steps that different countries or different industries, either if it's in-house legal departments or law firms or academia or courts, what are those typical aspects that are the first steps that people can really start getting more aware of, or better trained or better skilled to really see an immediate positive result?
Yeah, well, I think, let me suggest two answers. I think having a functional understanding of AI, learning about what these tools really are, is really important. And anyone can go on Coursera and they can do Andrew Ng's AI for Everyone. And it is a great way to learn. And there's more tools and books. So learning about what these tools actually are. However, a huge mistake people make is AI is the hammer. Hey, we're going to do an AI project. Let's use AI. Let's do something in the firm, right? You might get a little bit of a jump doing something like that, somehow figuring out how to use AI to do something. But what I really want to see organizations doing is really thinking about changing the mindset, the culture of their organization to get everyone to really be thinking about client-centered innovation. Like who are our customers? Who are our clients? What are their problems? What do we need to do to provide greater value and quality to them? It's most likely not going to start with AI. It's going to start with some of these other people, process, data, and technology tools. Really understanding what are our processes? What are the things we do? You know, who are we as an organization? Why do the clients come to us? How do we provide quality? How do we help solve problems for them? And learning your processes. And the more you can learn about, you probably should be putting off technology purchases and AI purchases as long as possible, right? Because once you start going down that path, you're making a big investment in something. That doesn't mean it has to be a long period of time, but if you don't really understand what you're trying to accomplish as an organization and who your customers are, who your clients are, the problems they have, and that you've really understood that, yeah, I've got value to provide here, right? I can really have a unique value proposition, and here's how I can use different technologies, including artificial intelligence, whether they're rules-based systems or data-driven systems, to further extend that value that I provide to those customers, right? Those organizations that can really be strategic in that way, they're the ones who are really going to do well in this transformation of legal services delivery.
Thank you very much, Dan. Great pleasure
Dan,
to have you.
we have a few university faculty and definitely students in not necessarily law, but also some sort of engineering careers. What would you say to them as far as curricula and advanced systems that I'm pretty sure that the US is far more advanced than what we have here in the programs? What would be their focus now for these kind of alliances between law and engineering programming?
Yeah, just the way lawyers need to better understand their clients and other people they work with, and lawyers need to learn about these things. There are huge opportunities for technologists who really understand the domain in which they're working. Whether they're creating tools for in the healthcare space or in the legal space here. And more schools are creating interdisciplinary programs where, like here at Northwestern, we have a computer science plus law program. I teach classes about law in the engineering school. I teach classes about tech in the law school, and we have classes in which engineers and law students work together on projects. And working in that interdisciplinary environment, whether you're a technologist or a lawyer, interdisciplinary communication, being parts of interdisciplinary teams are going to be more and more important in the future. We need to be able to learn to communicate, understand each other, what we're doing. In the workplace today, too much, people don't understand. They don't have this common language, right? They can't work across that divide. And so I would just encourage students and faculty to create opportunities to get people even together, whether it's just even starting with meetups and hackathons, even just talking about this, get people talking across those disciplines, asking curious questions and learning about what's being done and the opportunities to work together in this space. It's a really exciting time to be able to do that. Being able to do stuff like this online is a huge opportunity as well. And, just one quick thing too about, sure, not all jurisdictions are necessarily at the forefront of this, but you're seeing more and more jurisdictions. I mean, I mentioned Brazil, India, Estonia, right? There's tons of court systems that are thinking about, and governments that are thinking about, how can we use these technologies in the things we do? And we really should be thinking, all of us, whether you're a technologist or a lawyer, what is rule of law going to look like in this digital world? There are huge opportunities. We need everyone thinking about this and contributing to solving those problems.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yes, one of our next speakers in the next few days is Eileen Schultz, and she's the hackathon queen.
Yeah.
And yes, it will be very important that she'll definitely probably work on that too. But yeah, great advice. Thank you, Dan. Juan, do you have any further questions?
No, thank you very much, Dan. A pleasure having you, and thanks for the insight and all the great information that you shared with us.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for putting on this conference. It's a great opportunity to bring people together all around the world and learn. That's one of the other things that's so exciting about this, our stuff at Northwestern as well, the international audience, right? There's great interest everywhere. There's so many opportunities for us to work together. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Great seeing you. Take care. And for the rest of our guests, don't go away. We're going to stop broadcasting now for a few minutes. You have time to make a quick pit stop, and we'll be back. Don't have to do anything. Just keep your computers running, and we'll be back online in just a few short minutes with Ralph Baxter. Okay? Thank you, and we'll see you in a couple minutes.